Hello and welcome to this updating event. My name is Richard Stowe and I'm the Managing Director here at Weed Free Limited, and we're delighted to be the lead sponsor of this year's updating events. Weed Free has been an active member and supporter of the Amenity Forum for 12 years. We are a BASIS amenity assured contractor specialising in railway weed control. Our core staff all hold both railway and pesticide competencies, allowing us to apply herbicides to the rail network here in the UK, both by hand and from rail-borne machines. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the work that we do here at Weed Free, please feel free to give me a call. These updating events are an ideal opportunity for the Amenity Forum to reach out to potential new members, raise awareness and share industry updates and regulatory changes. I hope you enjoy today and find this event both useful and informative. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John to introduce the first speaker. Thank you very much.
So again, thank you for everybody for attending. We've run 2 events so far. We have about 140 registered on those 2 events. We had another 40 today, so that's really good news, and it demonstrates how helpful these can be. Obviously, face-to-face would be a lot better because I know a lot of the value of these events comes through the networking, but we'll do what we can within the restraints we all live currently. As I say, we'd like to thank Weed Free, who have been the overall sponsor for these events, and we're grateful for that. We're also grateful today to Headland, who are the event supporter, this particular event supporter, and Mark Diath will be speaking later, and I've had the opportunity to see his presentation, and I have to say it's certainly worth staying on the line for. And then I just wanted to mention the Amenity Spray Operator of the Year Awards. They're now open, sponsored by ICL and Syngenta. This year, we had to cancel them last year, but they're definitely running this year. So please contact Kate for information and get an application in. Those are the dates of the updating events. So here we are on the 23rd of February. On the 25th of February, now, although it says Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, obviously you can attend from any part of the UK, but there will be a particular emphasis on those countries. And on the 4th of March, the focus will be Scotland, as I say, on Thursday more Northern Ireland, because there are some tweaks around the various people. Now, this will be old hat to a lot of people on the call. But just for those who are not, that's the Amenity Forum in my old Swiss Army penknife. I never do an updating event without showing that penknife because it helped me enormously when I first took on this role some years ago. And it's been really helpful in discussions with DEFRA because, as you know, they're now very much involved with the new National Action Plan. And I think they've found it particularly helpful to get their head around what amenity is. So we are the voluntary initiative, and I think it really is important to recognise that. I act as the independent chairman and, if you like, the sort of conduit between policymakers and the sector itself, and obviously promoting best practice. That's far too busy a slide, but that tells you the sort of main activities that we engage with. And we're spending quite a lot of time more on communication at the minute. What I should say, by the way, is all these slides will be available to everybody who's registered after the final event. And so you will either be sent those, or if you request it from Kate, if you don't think you've got one, she will make it available to you. And those are the 3 important websites, again, for people who are new to us. That's the main site at the top. And then the other 2 sites, one is for the Amenity Standard, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And the other one is Get Britain Moving, which is our public communication one. And we've revamped that and are spending quite a bit of effort on that particular one. just quickly to mention the survey that is going on at the minute. In 2016, there was a survey, pesticide survey, which endeavoured to find out how much was being used in our sector, things about the number of trained staff, etc. I think by everybody's acceptance, that didn't get the response that we would have wanted. Primarily, I think, if I'm honest, because the questions were very much focused on the farm level, which didn't help people in terms of, excuse me, I've got something on my screen, which I don't know why I've got it. Right. It focused very much sort of an agricultural basis. So this time with the CRD staff and Tracy and her colleagues and the subgroup of the Immunity Forum, we work quite closely with them so that in them engaging the consultants FERA to do the work, I think now we've produced something that really is quite a user-friendly one. It's still got, I'm sure it's still got complications, but it is, and it really is important that we as a sector respond to that survey. Now, you've had lots of members and things have had countless emails from me about it, but please do respond. There's a particular focus on local authorities and golf, greenkeepers and the sort of infrastructure, but essentially we need responses from everyone. So please keep sending them in. And because DEFRA really see this as a very important tool for them in assessing just how important amenity is in its use of pesticides. This is today's event. And so these are the timings. In a moment, I'm going to turn over to Adrian Dixon, who's going to give us a policy update. I'll then put my own slant on that and pull out some of the issues that are occurring. We'll then, by Kate's magic, go into breakout sessions for you to discuss various things around that. There'll be time for questions and feedback. And I'm sorry, by the way, Mark, I've just seen on this program, it says presentation by Complete Weed Control. I'm sorry, that was last week. So that will be a presentation by Mark Diaz. And then I do a brief update on the immunity standard, which I think is important, and we will conclude. And as you know, any presentation from me would not be complete without some form of quotation. And I think given where we have been in the last 12 months, I think this is particularly apt. Someday everything will make perfect sense. So for now, laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, and keep reminding yourself that everything happens for a reason. And can I just say that I have been absolutely impressed with the way that the sector has responded to the challenge. And I know that respect is felt amongst policymakers as well, truly showing that you are an essential sector and something for us to build upon. So now, without further ado, where's the beard gone? We move on to Adrian Dixon, who's now going to take over and give his policy review. So Adrian, over to you.
Thanks, John. And for those who haven't heard your introduction before, it was you who added this slide, not me. And as everyone well knows, don't use passport photos when you're providing photos to conference organisers, I think is the moral for that one. So next slide, please, John. I'm Adrian Dixon. I head one of the two operational policy teams in HSE's Chemicals Regulation Division. My team particularly covers the legislation on PPPs, stakeholder engagement through bodies like the Immunity Forum, the Pesticides Forum, the Voluntary Initiative, etc., and maximum residue levels policy. So I'm very much on that side of things, whereas Grant Stark, who some of you may know, now heads a team that covers evidence and committees and new technologies. So Grant leads on things like the pesticide usage survey, but people like Tracy and my team are actually the ones who do the heavy lifting on that. Next slide, please, John. So what I want to cover this morning in a few minutes is the legal framework for PPPs, particularly in the light of EU exit, Sustainable use, just a reminder really of where things are on that. And also a few words about the future in respect to the National Action Plan consultation. And obviously John will go into that in more detail in his presentation and respect to the sector's potential response. Next slide, please, John. And if you can just click through the transitions, that would be brilliant. Thank you. So here's a slide that many of you may have seen before. It's a nice way of capturing the whole framework for PPP legislation and illustrates the life cycle of a plant protection product. So from the pre-marketing legislation, the authorization regulation 1107, the use phase, the Sustainable Use Directive, enacted in the UK, well in GB through the Plant Protection Product Sustainable Use Regulations, and Machinery Directive amendments for new equipment. And then at the end of the life cycle, the rules around disposal of plant protection products, whether that's used or unused, the residues legislation, which is obviously where pesticides end up, and also Water Framework Directive, Waste Framework Directive legislation. All of that is controls on the end of the PPP process. And across all that sits things like the pesticide usage survey, basically the how do you measure what impact you're having on by using pesticides, and what impact they're having in the environment, how much is being used, etc. You know, if you want to have a more sustainable use of pesticides, then you actually need to know where you're starting from and how to measure where you're going. Next slide, please, John. So in terms of EU exit, we've left the EU at the end of December, and we basically now have retained all the EU legislation into GB legislation. So basically what we did was the Withdrawal Act, which was agreed by Parliament, lifted the legislation, and we did some what are called operability fixes to make the legislation work for GB. So we obviously had to get rid of things like references to the Commission and the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, and basically make the legislation work for a GB system. And on the next couple of slides, you've got a list of statutory instruments which had to be made at various points. The first one makes the main corrections to the 1107 to make it work in GB. The next one makes corrections to the Sustainable Use Directive and the domestic implementing regulations, the Sustainable Use Regulations, so that they actually work properly. The third one corrects the maximum residues levels legislation, connects 396 and makes that applicable in a GB setting. Next slide, please, John. And then there have been further what we call wash-up SIs, basically to try and keep up with things, bearing in mind that the EU legislation was still changing whilst we were getting ready for exit. So there are various things that have had to be picked up. There are obviously occasional errors that slip in when you're drafting that amount of legislation, so they have to be corrected. As you may recall, exit day moved a couple of times. So again, that impacted on the legislation and had to be picked up. And even now, as you'll see at the bottom of the slide, there is still another statutory instrument that will be delayed. It says next year, but it was obviously written last year. It will be delayed later this year, which will pick up any decisions that were made by the EU between the last bit of legislation we did and the end of the transition period at the end of December. So you can see there's been an awful lot of work on all that just to actually give us a functioning GB system. Next slide, please, John. In terms of active substances, we've got a statutory active substance register, which has replaced the EU system on HSE's website. We're developing a GB review program for active substances. We're obviously outside the EU program now. And there'll be a timetable for that, and we will involve people in that being developed. But a key point is that we obviously also will be reacting to any changes that the EU does, or if there's new evidence that comes up, and looking at our own active substance approvals. And as it says on the bottom bullet, we have actually extended all active substances which were due to expire before December 2023. They've been extended for 3 years. That gives us time to put in a GB review program. But as I say, we can review active substance approvals at any time, notwithstanding that review program timing. Next slide, please, John. A bit about the active substance review program. What we want is something that we can actually manage. We don't want to over commit ourselves. One of the big problems with the EU program has been that it has been running behind time and really, not actually doing what it was trying to do. We need to make sure it's efficient and doesn't impact on our other review programs. For example, we will also be reviewing MRLs as part of a review program. We want to look at things like whether we can make use of assessment by other international regulators, one way or another. We want to look at whether we can have a smarter approach to active substance reviews rather than just sort of taking them chronologically like the EU does. And that might involve things like, whether we could group actives for review, by the class of chemical or by function, as to what they're doing, where they're being used. And as I say, we will be discussing with people how the program could work and what the impacts of it would be. Next slide, please, John. In terms of product applications, all the existing authorisations that we've issued in the UK before the end of the transition period, they carry on being valid. And then after the transition period, the authorisations will specify whether they're valid in Great Britain or Northern Ireland only, because Northern Ireland is still under the EU rules. And the key thing is that anybody applying for an authorisation for a pesticide product will need to have authorisation under both regimes to gain access to both markets. We won't be changing the data requirements or the format for applications for product authorisations. And we will be processing, or we have processed anything before the end of the transition period as usual, except for some exceptions. Next slide, please, John. There's some of the changes and things that are highlighted here. We will try and make sure that the map numbers are common between GB and Northern Ireland for anybody who has an interest in that direction. We want to keep the labelling as common as possible. But of course, there may be divergence depending on what happens with expiry dates to active substances, for example. If we take a different decision to the EU or take it at a different time to the EU, and there may be divergence around conditions of authorization, data protection periods. So there's going to be some changes. There's going to be some similarities, I think is the summary there. Next slide, please, John. So in summary, basically, from the 1st of January, we're operating a new independent regulatory regime in Great Britain. We're taking responsibility for our own decisions on pesticides using our own rules, but all active substance approvals, PPP authorisations and MRLs that were there before the end of the transition period carry on being valid. And PPP authorisations remain valid so that they're carried over after the 1st of January. And active substances have been extended for 3 years. And we will set our own maximum residue levels for GB based on our own assessments. But again, all existing MRLs will remain valid until they're amended. And the Northern Ireland regime, as I mentioned, continues to follow the EU rules under the Northern Ireland Protocol. Next slide, please, John. Now to talk a bit about sustainable use. There's a whole load of strategies around that give the context for sustainable use, and John will also talk about these, I suspect. There's the DEFRA 25-year environment plan, which has been bouncing around a couple of years, and which also introduces the concept of the Office for Environmental Protection, which now has a designate chair, so that's progressing. There are various policies in the devolved administrations as well, so all of those throw their weight into the sustainable use context. And then there are even bigger pictures like carbon net zero targets, which those of you in industry and running companies will be familiar with those, domestic biodiversity targets, and the whole international context of trade agreements, etc. Next slide, please, John. The aim of the sustainable use legislation is basically, as described there, I won't read it all out, but we're basically trying to get sustainable use, balancing risks and impact on health and the environment, promoting IPM and alternative approaches. And this is the thing that drives the whole areas for national actions. Next slide, please, John. Just to quickly remind you of the basic requirements, which haven't changed, so it's well worth sort of having a reminder at these updating events. There's a requirement for specified certificates, but recommending continuous professional development, controls on sales of product to make sure the end user has a certificate, and controls on application equipment. If you can ride on it, you get it tested, and also the need for regular calibration, which almost goes without saying, but we have to keep saying it. Next slide, please, John. Then there are these areas that are a bit harder to measure and harder to apply almost. How do you actually make sure that you're doing things properly, demonstrating due diligence, protection of water, and how do you take account of that and the risk to water from different products? And then the knotty problem of IPM, which is harder to apply in some sectors than others, but I think, you know, the amenity sector has been applying IPM in different areas and indeed may well be leading in some of the specialised areas. So that's the priority there. Next slide, please, John. That's just a picture of the current UK National Action Plan to remind you what it looks like. Next slide, please, John. And the priority areas in the current National Action Plan were improving practice in amateur and amenity, particularly around risk understanding and mitigation and training initiatives, protection of water, and integrated approaches with PPPs as part of a range of control measures, and maximising the effectiveness of R&D and knowledge transfer. Next slide, please, John. And as you're aware, there's the Draft National Action Plan consultation, which was issued in December, and the consultation closes on the 26th, so later this on Friday, just before midnight on Friday. And those are the aims of the National Action Plan, and it's set out in various goals, which I think John will talk about in more detail anyway. But you'll see those covers all the key areas that you're interested in. So robust regulation, uptake of IPM, sustainable use of pesticides, improving metrics, and particularly working with partners to deliver the goals. The key point is that the National Action Plan is a UK-wide plan. It's just DEFRA's running the consultation on behalf of all 4 administrations, and it applies to all pesticide users. And I say the deadline for responses at the end of this week. Next slide, please, John. And that's it. So a quick whistle top tour through things, and I'll pause for breath now. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, you went through that very speedily today.
I did. That's surprised myself there. Yeah, I think I was 5 minutes faster than last time.
I think Adrian must have had his cup of coffee and got his caffeine. He went through quite quick. But thank you, Adrian. I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff there, and you can gather that Adrian and his team are incredibly busy at the minute in terms of adapting to lots of things, and it's important to recognise that we are grateful of the forums being consulted and involved with those, so that's good news. Now, rather than take specific questions at this point, I thought what might be useful is if I move straight on to mine, and then, as I say, there'll be a breakout session, but then there will be opportunity to ask Adrian questions around what he has said, and finally the presentations will all be available at the end of the 5 events. So I'm going to move straight on, I think, if that's all right with people, because what I will very much focus my presentation around the new National Action Plan, the new UK National Action Plan, because I think it provides quite a good template for building on what Adrian said, and also talking about how the industry might need to respond to some of those changes. And you know, again, it's worth repeating what Adrian has said. You know, central to the whole revised National Action Plan is integrated pest management. Now, that's not new, but it is really reinforced. And a number of our members responded to a call from myself to meet with consultants that DEFRA have appointed about IPM. And I think generally there was great surprise in a lot of the stuff there that, in fact, amenity is very much, as Adrian suggested, at the vanguard of a lot of work within integrated approaches. There is the DEFRA 25-year environment plan, and that's really important. But again, as Adrian has said, national governments are different. So I think it's really important to stress that this is a consultation on behalf of all 4 national administrations, with DEFRA acting as the main point of contact. And again, that is slightly different from previous people. Tracy and her colleagues have been more involved before. DEFRA are definitely dealing with the policy, and it's been quite an exciting time. I think I can use the word exciting, because they've adopted very much a sort of team approach within DEFRA, all headed up by people. So we've had to get to know these people. We've got to get to know how they do things. But I think a lot of it is coming together. And we have made our response to the consultation, as you'll see later on. And I hope other organisations will as well, because it's very important that the amenity sector shows its colours in the response to the consultation. And I've circulated, certainly to members, our draft. And if you want to use that, please do. Now, let's just look at the new plan, and let's look at sort of the key factors within it. Reducing reliance on plant protection products. That doesn't mean not using them, but it's about saying targeting, it's about minimisation, it's about looking at integrated approaches. So that is a key driver as far as they're concerned. Protecting people's health. And I could put in there now, of course, the carbon situation. I think that's now becoming to the fore, looking at methods you use and what their carbon implications are. Environmental protection, best practice, and looking at monitoring use and impact and trying to get that slightly more refined. And again, we're involved with all the work groups around all of those topics that I've mentioned there. And then obviously from a government point of view, UK government point of view, key drivers, public money for public goods, environmental protection, sustainability, carbon footprint, health and safety, and productivity. Now, of course, the pandemic over the last 12 months has meant quite a few swerves along the road, but those still remain very much the key priorities set by the Prime Minister and the government. And of course, economic recovery now is a prime requirement. So let's just look at the new plan, and let's look at the 5 key elements within it. So first of all, ensure robust regulation to protect health and the environment. So if you look at the consultation document, and by the way, you won't have chance, I know, to read all of these, but I've highlighted in red the sort of areas that I think are quite important. So when we're looking at regulation, they're saying they need to make the system simpler for users, so they want some responses on that. They're talking about innovation. They're talking about the regulation for biopesticides, and obviously they're talking about IPM approaches. And this is a slide you've already seen from Adrian, so I won't repeat it, but essentially, obviously, we have got this slight divergence now, well, slight or major divergence with Great Britain and then Northern Ireland, who are currently under the EU pesticide rules. But I do want to stress that part in bold because I'm getting so many questions from so many people. So let's be absolutely clear, because I know glyphosate is a topic everybody talks about. Following departure from the EU, approval for glyphosate with its current date of 2022 has been extended until 2025 in Great Britain. So unless some new evidence comes available that we haven't even thought about, till 2025, that approval will exist in Great Britain. So it's really important. Now, Ireland, as I say, Northern Ireland is in the transition. There's lots of discussions, but essentially that is true for Great Britain. Now, I won't bore you with that because you know it already, but our response to this sort of section is we agree it's very important to have a rigorous and robust regulatory system. We agree on understanding the science and analysing the evidence. We are making the point that in implementing the regulatory system, when deciding to withdraw an active, the process needs to consider fully unintended consequences. I think what we're indicating there is when you withdraw an active, particularly in amenity, where in fact the number of products are limited anyway, essentially it's really important to consider the sort of withdrawal process. What might happen? Will people, if the withdrawal just happens like that, everybody's under pressure still to deliver quality sports service and everything else, and it might lead to the use of, dare I say it, illegal products or doing it in a different way. So it's really, we believe that whole process of that timetable needs to be considered fully about those unintended consequences. We've sort of made the point that we think it's important to look at the ever escalating costs of approvals. We all know in amenity this is a challenge because if you're a major manufacturer, it costs a lot of money to get a product to market. And of course, amenity, although we think it's important, is still the junior partner in when we come to use of PPPs compared to agriculture. So we do think that's important. And the other topic we've highlighted is reviewing all life cycle consequences. So really important that when we look at the use of plant protection products and other approaches, that we look at all the issues around carbon footprint and sustainability. And I think a number of local authorities who have been under pressure from their councillors to go away from glyphosate are now coming to terms with this because they're recognising that by going away from what they have been doing, the consequences in relation to things like carbon are much greater, apart from just costs as well. With biopesticides, we accept that they have got enormous potential. I think all of us will know it's not a simple process. You can't just replace PPPs with biopesticide in that way. But we've already raised this, and in under Adrian's headship, they are looking at this because the current regulatory system for biopesticides can create a somewhat grey area. Now, this doesn't mean we don't agree with them, but I think it's important because if the biological product in concerned, its primary purpose is, and let's just say, for sake of argument, soil conditioning, but it has a secondary use, which is to control pests. We need to be clear how that relates, because currently it might look from its constitution that it doesn't come under PPP regulations because it's got a primary purpose. But if it's being used for control of pests, should it come under? And there's a real grey area there, which again I think can be sorted, but it's something that I know Adrian and his team are looking at to see how we get that consistency in relation to how we review products. And then, I mean, this again is far too busy a slide, but because I haven't got that too much time, we are talking about, obviously we think research, we're bound to support research. We do believe in stewardship type projects. We think that's got legs to look at more. We do want to sort of make the thing about sometimes when things are looked at, the particular aspects of amenity are not taken fully into account. And so often what can happen is that you judge the product for agriculture and then you add on hurdles relating to amenity, whereas perhaps sometimes it wants to be the other way around. And things like using products on golf greens or on grass fields, and then they will say, well, actually, rolling on the grass, it's very unlikely anybody's going to roll on a green. So I think what we're saying is it's really important that rather than being add-ons, it's taken as a whole. And then these additional registration requirements then can often happen, which do cause add expense and mean we've got issues around that. So that's very briefly, and it builds on what Adrian has talked about. The second one is to support the development and uptake of IPM, which we all know about. And it says within it, things like we'll work with stakeholders so they have access to IPM approaches. We'll support the development of IPM approaches to protect or enhance the environment whilst maintaining. And they put crop protection. This is another really good time I often have with DEFRA over the last few months, where they now know what I'm going to say. I think there's a guy called Paddy there, and the other day he replied to me, "I know what you're going to say, John. We've mentioned crops, and we shouldn't have done, should we?" So I think, but that's where they are. And I'm going to make issue with a diagram that's in the consultation, because it's this triangle, and I don't like it. I don't like it for a number of reasons, but I don't like it because it primarily it's tending to indicate that chemicals, and chemicals, I don't like that word anyway, because chemicals implies something nasty, when in all bodies, everybody who's sat here today are made up of chemicals. So essentially chemicals is the wrong word as far as I'm concerned. But I think this diagram also doesn't impress me because it's tending to say that chemicals are the last resort, as opposed to this, which I think is far better, which sort of says, when you take an integrated approach, you look at all the alternatives that are available to you. And again, alternatives, another word I hate, because it implies, it's one or the other. I think when you're looking at an approach to managing a golf green or a sports surface or a motorway or a railway line, it's about looking at all the various approaches, reducing the reliance certainly on PPPs, minimizing targeting the use, but looking at all of them in that way. And I know that Ruth Mann, who's probably not on the call today, but basically Ruth, in her response to a document, talked about the fact that this is food and drink to STRI, how they look at sports surface, they look at it in this sort of circular diagram. We invested some money back in 2019, or our members did, and we have got a document which was produced by an independent consultant, which is a guidance document on IPM, quite a thick document, and also a template for creating integrated management plans, and for local authorities, a policy document. If you are a supporter or a member of the forum, that's absolutely free. Just contact Kate and she'll give you the password. If you're not a member, I think the cost is very, very small, and it's certainly worthwhile you getting hold of that. And again, I've sent that DEFRA have seen that and believe that to be a really good document to use. So the structure to our response, apart from this, is we obviously support continuing professional development. And actually, I'll go as far as saying that we wouldn't we may well argue for it to become a requirement. We think it's a bit vague at the minute. It tends to talk about it being desirable, but is it required or is it not is important to us. And you'll find this word being used, two words being used a lot. We believe the amenity standard should become a requirement. And I'll explain a little bit about the reasons for that in a minute, but it is fundamental to the whole where we go forward in terms of the sector. As we've said, integrated, we've said it's very much in the thinking of how we do things at the moment. We've redefined it. Again, when you look at their definition of integrated approaches, they talk a lot about environment and other things. Economics doesn't figure as much as it does. Now, economics shouldn't drive everything, but it's quite important to look at economics, because if you do veer away on other techniques, you might find the costs go up as well. And communication is vital. Just a couple of other small things. There's a strong case for introducing some sort of financial support scheme, particularly for local authorities. If they're going to adapt their policies to a more integrated approach, they could benefit from some resource to actually do that. And we need some more funded research. So in summary, on this section, we think they should build on the success of the Amenity Forum. That's, you'd expect me to say that, but I think it's important. I think the Amenity Forum as an organisation has grown tremendously. And what a great idea it was back long before my time to establish something like this. But it's moved now. We now have well over 100 members. We cover all aspects, and it really is an important body. We do believe the amenity standard should become a requirement, and we believe that really strongly, because the amenity standard is not another qualification. It's a way of demonstrating to people, to the public and policy, that you are members of an approved assurance scheme. You operate at a professional standard, like the red tractor in agriculture. Like if I appoint an electrician or a gas fitter, I need to see their standard to know that they're members of an assured scheme. That is what the amenity standard is. And we do believe that enforcement needs to be strengthened. Now, some people find that very odd when I say that. They say we didn't expect users to say that, but I think it would be welcome, certainly by members of the forum, in terms of enforcing, because if not, people go, why should we bother? And I think that's not the way we want to do. The third element of the consultation, or the 5 themes that Adrian referred to, is ensure those who use plant protection products do so safely and sustainably. So again, we've brought out in our response, and this has been shared with members and in terms of getting comments from them, we'll look to enhance the system of enforcement for pesticides. We think it would help, because what it will do is drive out bad practice. And we want professional standards of best practice, so we're there. We also think this whole issue of purchasing pesticides needs to be looked at the point of sale. I know there is some there that the person buying it needs to give the assurance that it's being used by a qualified operator, but I think there needs to be some tightening up of that and some review of how that is done. And we want to work with partners to provide clear messages for amateur users. Now, this is not to say amateur is bad or good. It's just that I think, we've got an amenity forum, we've got a VI. I think it's important that we embrace amateur, and it's a discussion that I've had with the VI recently, the VI chairman, and we're going to have a meeting with representatives from the amateur section to see how we can get them much more engaged and involved with what we're trying to do. So that's where we are, and again, we're not shying away from mentioning enforcement and also carbon footprinting. because carbon footprinting is really important. Meeting the carbon targets is central, certainly to our friend Boris's views. And it's really important that when we look at methods of use, that we look at it in that way. And if you do that, of course, very often plant protection products, authorized plant protection products, come out very well indeed. Communication, and you've heard me say this before, but it's quite important. There are sort of three categories of people to be communicated with. Those within the sector, and I think the Amenity Forum has spent quite a lot of time producing guidance notes and other things, running updating events like this. But we are very aware that, very often somebody once said to me, you're talking to the converted. There are still the harder to reach groups within our sector. Now, again, and I'm sorry if I'm going to dwell on this, but if we could create an amenity standard. Now, for example, there's one large contractor, large tender issuing organisation that now has actually changed their spec to say that those applying need to be able to demonstrate they're at the amenity standard. Because and we've had one or two inquiries from people who are not there now to Kate saying, how do we get involved with this? Because we obviously have got to do. I think it would seriously improve best practice. It would seriously drive out bad practice, and that must be good for all that there. There's then the public, and we launched the Get Moving site some 2 or 3 years ago. We've refreshed that because what we recognised we got it wrong. We produced the Get Moving site, but we didn't think about the other part of it, which was how we get people aware of the site and make real use of it. So we've refreshed the site. There's much more friendly video clips, unfortunately featuring me in some of them, but there you go. And what we're also doing now is we're engaging with advisors so we can get more access to the public media. And finally, we've got to communicate to those who sit not directly within the sector but make the ultimate decision. And I've spent quite a bit of time talking to the national governments or the national administrations in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, because although we are UK, it's quite important that we ensure that the messages are going right through there. And the Welsh Government have sent out to all their local authorities. The Minister in Scotland has written a letter to all the local authorities talking about best practice and what can do. And I think that's something we've really got to build on. When we've talked about raising public awareness, why, who cares? And I do get a lot of people often say to me, we'll never win this. We'll never win it if we don't move it forward. And to be honest, that bit on the right-hand side, people have heard me say this so many times. What happens in amenity management impacts upon every UK citizen every day. When you walk out your house, when you're allowed to, when you catch a train, when you're allowed to, all of those times, it actually is, and it's trying to seek a safe, sustainable and healthy space fit for purpose. But we need to bang on and get that message out to people. That's where Get Moving comes. And as I say, we're about to embark on the next phase of this. We were last July going to run a week of celebrating amenity, which is going to be part of it. Of course, that got cancelled. We're looking to put that now. I've been looking at Boris's timetable, and we might well be able to align that if Biggar are happy with their outdoor event, because we want to really celebrate it and how we get it and get it on the national media as well. Because that's something, I always keep saying, but we have got to be proud of what we do. And I think, it's still true. I've said this over the last few years. It's still true that a number of people do such a really good job, but don't tell people what they do. And it's really, really important we do that more, because it's so easy to do. I mean, I've had people who say, oh yeah, well, when I'm doing this particular spraying there, I try to keep as anonymous as possible and keep out of the way. But again, that indicates to a member of the public who sees you that actually you're doing something wrong, when actually you're really doing something right. And I won't bore you with this anymore because we'll do this at the end, but the amenity standard, that's why it is quite important to me. It was really a great joy to me the other day to see a lawn care van which had the amenity standard logo on it, which indicated they were a member of Lawn Assured, the recognised scheme, and they were proud that they were there. And what was even better is when I actually talked to the technician, because I was doing my usual constitutional, and I said to him, you know what that is? He knew. And I think that's really important in terms of where we go. We do believe that strengthening obligations on sellers, as I say, is they check for proof that the buyer is qualified. So this CPD, because there is still not that enough people part of a CPD scheme. There's considerable merit in the case for advisors, but we have pointed out to DEFRA that advice in amenity is very different to agriculture, because obviously very often that advice comes from a variety of sources. It might even come from the contractor that they've done, it might come from the distributor or whatever. But again, we're happy to engage with a discussion around how that is done and how it should be qualified. And so we've mentioned CPD, so I think I can put this slide on and quickly move on. I don't want to bore you again, but you've probably gathered that this is central to everything we're doing, and I'm sorry about that. And some people have said to me, I think you could be over-egging this. I don't think I am at all, because I think this shows the sector has come of age. It's come to an age where it can now. And Adrian said, when we did the last National Action Plan review, and I remember it well, Adrian, we've both been there. And I remember I used to, you could take it to bed, by the way, and it was one of the best ways to get into sleep, because you got halfway through, you went to sleep. But it did say there needed to be improvements in amenity. This time, that is not there. We have come an awful long way. We've still a way to go, but we've come an awful long way. And that's why we now need to be able to show people we're not scared about being professional. We're not scared about demonstrating that, because that is really important as a sector. We mentioned this concept of, as I said, about enforcement and inspection. I often use the example of Ireland. In Ireland, where we actually worked with them on a different topic, but where they were concerned that they weren't getting people sprayer testing. Now, again, folks, I'm sorry if this sounds, it may not be what you'd like me to say, but they targeted 2 or 3, publicly showed that they'd found 2 or 3. What happened? Sprayer testing just shot up overnight because everybody moved that way. Sprayer testing, I mean, we have responded, as Adrian said, if you sit on it, it's got to be tested. We have responded, but it's still, when you look at the numbers, I'm still nervous that there are still sprayers out there. And I think a particular thing we need to look at is sprayers that are under 5 years old, because once they're 5, they're going to be tested. But I've seen 1 or 2 imported sprayers, and I'm not sure they'd pass the test. At retail outlets, we believe amateur products, there should be a suitably informed and qualified person on hand. So if I go into my Dobbies down the road from where I live and I pick up a packet of Roundup, I should be able to go and say to somebody, I need some advice on this. And I don't want them then to say, well, we've got somebody at head office who can do it. We'll ring them. There ought to be somebody there. And maybe we ought to have some kind of system that if you buy it, you've got to give some kind of undertaking that you understand it. Because it's quite important that amateurs aren't necessarily the problem, but I'm an allotment holder, and I have seen how they dispose of some of their containers, and it's not the way to do. So there might well to be there. And we've also talked about this amnesty scheme for all those that are hidden in garden sheds and what have you. And then finally, and I'm relatively keeping to time, not finally. The fourth one was to set targets to support reduction of risks and improve statistics. Now, that's what they say in the document. We will establish a set of clear targets, and they talk about reduction of risk. They talk about water, of course, and water really is important in this dimension now. I've been saying this for a number of years. We signed up to very high quality standards. Now, we may not be members of EU anymore, but we still got signed up to those high standards. You talk to any water board or water supplier, and there's a nervousness about us getting there. So that's really important. So we would agree that there needs to be targets. What we'd actually say is very often, again, in amenity, the targets that are produced are very, very much in the language of agriculture. And I think it's quite important that again, we look at amenity. If you're going to get a response from the sector, it needs to be in those ways. That is why, as well, the survey is so important, and your response to it. You must respond to that survey, because that will demonstrate that how professional we are, but how much we use products and how much they're important to the sector as a whole. But as I say, I've offered very much with DEFRA and others to get involved with a review system which is more in line with there. And we certainly agree with the research and innovation. I've been privileged to look at a number of the manufacturers, Bayers and Syngentas and others, and to see the amount of innovation that's going on. Again, a lot of it focused on agriculture inevitably, because that's where the most use is. But again, I think we're more than eager to get engaged with that kind of work. And then finally, ensure effective work with others to deliver the goals. Now, there is a new chairman of the voluntary initiative. I've already had 3 meetings with him, and we are now working together to actually have quarterly updates, because what we've both said is that, again, for far too long, probably there's been this distinction. And what we've got to look at is where we actually agree, where the common themes are, not where our differences are. So we're cooperating in terms of that. And we also believe it's important to look at other groups. So I've had discussions with the NFU, I've had discussions with AIC, because I think it's really important that we demonstrate to DEFRA and the policymakers that the sector can work together, and that the VI and the forum are the essential tools in able to do that. There, as I say, is my final sort of slide on this part. Those are the 5 blocks, and it's really important that we understand those to be there. Again, I don't think there is anything to fear, provided we act professionally and demonstrate we are doing things correctly. Now, I'm bound to have missed lots out. There's lots of things going on, but that was an attempt to sort of put the sector view on what Adrian said. And what we're now going to do, and I think, believe it or not, we're just about on time, and hopefully Kate is in the back. Oh, she is. I can see her. Because now Kate is going to do something magical in a minute. she will actually put you into breakout groups. Now, you won't have a choice of which breakout group you're in because it's how it's done. And because it's based on the numbers who registered, we had the other day somebody who I said to him, how did you get on in your breakout group? And he said, I got on really well. I was on my own. But that's rare. You should have some more than one there. So you go into a group, you elect a spokesperson, and what we'd like you to look at is, you've heard from Adrian and myself, identify key issues that you believe are facing your organisation, and what are the key priorities for you going forward. Now, I've put there 3 on up to 3. Don't be tied down, but basically it's often very good if you've got to focus on fewer than a lot. What I'd like you to do is to email those, the spokesperson, to email those back to Kate or myself, but I think primarily Kate, because they'd be really helpful for us in determining how we're going forward. And currently the forum is actually engaged in another review of its strategy, so it'd be really helpful, because we probably won't have time to have report backs from everybody and the questions. So please do that, and that would be helpful. So I think, Kate, do we give now, I've always got to remember now how long I'm going to do for this. I think I give 20 minutes because we build into that break time. So we're going to give you 15 minutes for the breakout and 5 minutes to go and refresh your cup of coffee or any other ablution that you need to do. And then we will be back in the room at 11:35. Please come back for that, because you've got your questions, and also you've got Mark's presentation, which, as I say, I think you'll find interesting. And now, and by the way, you don't need to worry about coming out of your groups, because Kate does that again. So off you go, Kate. Take them.
Okay, all right.
We've now got a time for feedback and questions. And I mean, I think what I'm going to start with, first of all, are there questions that, as a result of Adrian and my presentation, you'd like to ask? And then if we get time for feedback, we can. I see somebody with a hand up already.
I have, John.
William.
I have one for Adrian, actually. As you mentioned that all 4 countries are going to have, develop their own environmental strategies. And obviously that's most of these environmental strategies are politically based, and some of their targets will be aspirational. How are you going to square with, how is that going to impact on your registration assessments to balance everything before all 4 countries? Are you going to go to the lowest denominator, or how's that going to fit in with how you've with the registrations?
I mean, that's a good question, William. I mean, basically, the registration requirements, authorization, approval, call them what you will, requirements are still to the same environmental standards as they were before. And, government ministers have made lots of comments about maintaining standards or possibly improving them where possible. So we will basically carry on with the sort of, development of guidance documents and things like that, just as we would do, with any regulatory process. And then part of the whole governance of it, in terms of decision making in things, is where the 4 administrations then sort of stick their 10 pence in. So, from our point of view as the independent regulator, we carry on according to the scientific standards and assess according to the science, and assess according to the guidance that we've got. And then in terms of sort of developing new guidance in terms of regulatory approaches and things, then that's where, the sort of political dimension would come in, when we then say to the administrations, look, this is where you could go, where do you want the system to go, basically.
Can I follow that up, Adrian, with a couple of things? I mean, first of all, we've seen in the pandemic the sort of national administrations have, how can I put it, flexed their muscle quite a bit more. In other words, they've been saying we're going to do it our way. And although this is a UK national action plan, I'd be interested to see how you see that relationship, if you've got any thoughts on it at all, or are able to have. And I think the second thing is how Northern Ireland, clearly, you made it very clear, Northern Ireland is in the EU element, and that's going to create a divergence. Now, again, you're not the Prime Minister, but at the end of the day, I just want
Thank goodness.
CRD are preparing to work that as well, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you say, the whole thing with the sort of national action plan, there's the consultation, then the administrations will sort of sit down looking at the responses and come up with a national action plan on the back of that between all four of them. And there may well be, hopefully there will be large areas of agreement, and there may be areas of sort of difference. I mean, one simple example, I mean, we've already seen things like the Pestmark sort of amnesty in Wales, for example, and different sort of things going on in Scotland. So there've always been that sort of scope for doing things a little bit, according to the area, etc., which that continues. But like you say, there is a major sort of need to sort of try and get some coordination, particularly for people like yourselves who work across boundaries. That's the thing. And in terms of Ireland, I mean, in terms of the regulatory approach, in the first instance, we will be sort of operating a sort of EU-based authorization system for Ireland, and a GB one, which will be very similar to start off with to the Northern Ireland one. But as you say, there could be divergence as it goes. I suspect the bigger issue will be around what the chemical companies find are suitable markets. Bearing in mind that previously the whole of the UK has been part of the EU market, and to the same conditions. It's then sort of separating off into a GB market. Is that worth it? Depending on what the standards are, and similar with Northern Ireland, that may well be an issue going forward. But thanks.
Okay. Yeah, Neil. Introduce yourself so that everybody knows who's speaking.
Sorry, Neil Hook, a member of Barley, and technical advice to the board on these sort of things. And also I've been a founder member of the Immunity Forum a long time ago. First thing, John, I've got a list of points we made, 4 points. Should I just read them out?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, fine.
It affects Adrian as well. Members of the public, misinformation they're getting from various sources, which are causing problems right across the piece in housing associations, local authorities. The latest one I've come up against more and more is glyphosate's killing bees. Is poison to bees. Where they get that from, I don't know. Information to companies and to clients who are dealing with tendering for this, or dealing with writing a tender for pesticide use. Is the need for training and understanding a standard across the board on tender documents. Clients are the same. You're dealing with a lot of clients who are not horticultural trained or aware, apart from the pressure groups within the council, within the organisation. The other one we had was dealing with CPD and training. I know people who took their test in '89. They've never done anything since. They carry on working. Is that right? Do we need a CPD system or retraining system on a period of time? I know it's been in the Sustainable Use Directive, but it's not been fully taken up by UK? So that's a question we've been asked. And finally, how we work round, as we are public facing, the alternatives, what we're doing with that. Thermal systems put out more carbon than chemical use does. You need to explain that to the public. So you need that information. They're all there. Integrated pest management is good, but how do we apply it in our situation is the big question.
Thank you, Neil. I mean, on the CPD one, and I mean, I'd be interested if people don't think this, but we've certainly in my discussions with DEFRA and others, I think CPD has to become a requirement, basically, because I think it's it would make it a lot easier, and it makes it a lot easier for people like Adrian's team to monitor and everything else, because at the moment, desirable is not, you know, and what I always say to people is if you're not engaged in CPD and something happens, that would be a bad point. But it's not the same as saying you should engage with it, because you're dead right. I always remember back in Saltex question time about 3 years ago when somebody at the back stood up and started to say all sorts. And I don't know how it came out. I just said, how long have you been in the sector? And he said, I've been in it for about 40 years. And I said, so what continuing professional development have you done? He said, I got my certificate 40 years ago. He said, well, I don't need it. I don't need anything else. And I think that doesn't do our industry any good at all. Adrian, I don't know if you have any remarks on any of the points that Neil made.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly on the CPD one, I mean, like you say, it's a logical thing to do. I mean, it's probably worth highlighting the fact that the reason why it isn't there in the sustainable use regulations at the minute is because of the time when we were doing the directive, and we were in a time of no gold plating, etc., and political times change, as you know, Neil. So you may well be pushing at an open door with that one. In terms of information, I agree it's a difficult one from our point of view as the regulator, and this question's been popped up at the other updating events, so it's clearly a common issue. From our position as a regulator, obviously all we can do is say, you know, this is approved, this is authorised, or this isn't approved and this isn't authorised. And that's how we deal with it. If people write in saying, you know, we'll stop the councils using this, or HSE should stop the councils doing that, or we can, you know, our line is as an independent regulator is to say, you know, it's approved and here's what the system is. There's probably some wider messaging which I think the administrations do around the political direction of these things, but that's for them, and they will do the, you know, if people write saying, you know, glyphosate's doing X, Y, and Z, then they will write with some slightly wider UK position. So I mean, these things are taken up, but I agree. You know, it's very difficult to deal with at the the coalface, as it were. Some of these things. I think this is the problem, Neil. It's, and you know, as we discussed in our group and things, it's all around these. And John made the point in his presentation. You know, use of some of these words like chemicals, and things like that, and you know, produce some very emotive reactions. So it's a difficult one. Thanks.
I think I think that's really interesting. I think just on what I didn't say in mine, because the better enforcement runs through their document and we're supporting. I think that equally in our response, we've said that needs resource, because clearly, you know, I think that's part of the issue that you know, any case that I've ever brought to CRD, they act upon it, but I think it needs more resource to be able to do that. And so I just wanted to give Adrian that reassurance as well, because I know he has a tricky job to handle in terms of managing these sort of things. Right. If there are no more questions, oh yes, there are. There's one at the bottom there. Yeah, please. I can see somebody with a hand up on my screen. There might be other people, but I can only see one. Is it William?
Yeah, it's me, John, again. Sorry. I have a question for you this time. A comment you made on one of your slides was about removal of active ingredients. And, you know, as an industry, and I think all of us are very keen that active ingredients are removed from a science-based perspective rather than any other particular reason. A comment you made with that, and with the science-based one, was added on there, but if only if replacements were around, that these ought to be considered.
Yeah.
The thing about having replacement, you know, replacement actives or chemistry, if there is a well-established chemistry in with a particular use that has not been removed because there isn't a replacement for it, you're not going to get new chemistry. Because while there is established chemistry doing a particular job, if you're keeping it, even if it's having a negative impact, you're not going to get a new one, because where there's a gap in the market, that's when we would be looking for new chemistry to replace it.
William, if I said that, I shouldn't have said it, because I didn't intend to say what you said. I've said what I said was that I think when an active is withdrawn, or is to be withdrawn, and it's for good reasons. I mean, it may well be that it has to be, but what I'm saying is there needs to be a review of the unintended consequences, because if you withdraw it too quickly, you know, let's all be, I'm conscious of people on the line here, but, you know, people may well have, they may not supposed to be using stocks, but they've still got stocks because of the timetable. They might look at other products. So I don't think I was saying until a replacement comes available. What I was actually saying was a proper review of the unintended consequences, because you know, that's in mentioning biological stuff, like, you know, again, I'm not knocking products, but where, for example, a product is principally for use for the other, but as a secondary PPP use, that you know, if you're a greenkeeper, you've got to produce a green. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, it just needs to be thought through. But I wasn't actually saying what you said, William. I'm not saying you wait until that, but I just think it's important that we understand the unintended consequences if we do it too quickly. That's all.
Often, I'd like to say, often the unintended consequence is a driver for new chemistry, because you've left a need and a gap. And I think principally we all know leather jackets and chafer grubs at the moment. There's a huge gap in the market for that. But that means that everyone's looking for one. And if there wasn't a gap there, because the chemistry that you've removed was well established, no one was looking for any new chemistry in that market at all. Whereas now there's an opportunity. So new chemistry has been considered.
Yeah.
That won't happen unless there is a gap.
I understand that, but equally, and I don't know if anybody's on the call from lawn care, but equally, if for example you are a lawn care person and you're adapting to the regulations, but a householder then says to you, well, I've been on the internet and I can get this product from America. What I'm trying to say is it can create, and then they start to apply it, so you've not got a professional applying it. So all we're trying to say is, we're not saying don't withdraw it, we're just saying as long as we do a proper review of what might happen if you don't do it. Is there anybody on lawn care on the line? Tom's not on the line.
Yeah, I'm here, John. Yes, yeah. We do have an issue with, certainly with unapproved products being brought into the UK, and particularly that, you know, there are no insecticides now available for things like chafer grubs and leather jackets, which can be devastating to people's lawns and to golf courses and professional sports. And yeah, we've certainly seen examples and reported it to you of products being brought in from the US and used here illegally. Another unintended consequence, I'd say as well. I mean, we mainly use in our sector selective weed control in turf. That's our by far and away our largest use of any pesticide product. Unintended consequences, if for example, if we don't have those products in the future, then certainly the unintended consequence will be lots of people unable to maintain their lawns to the level they want, and lots of those people will swing towards things like plastic lawns going forward. And there's a big move already in that direction. That industry has taken off, and I think most people know here that having a piece of plastic on soil is just about the most environmentally unfriendly you could possibly think that you do. So there are certainly some big unintended consequences should there be any shifts in products availability.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you. I'm not rushing to have a plastic lawn, Tom. You'll be glad to hear.
Thank you, Joe.
But you are right. I mean, you're spot on in terms of doing it. Now, we've still got 5 minutes. Now, so if there are no specific questions, is there any group would like to volunteer to their comments? There was a group with Lewis Sin and Colin. I can pick on you, one of you. Or who was the spokesman for your group?
I was nominated, John.
Oh, good. Well, can you tell us anything that came out of yours?
I can, if I can just get my notes that I made. I think the main thing, and it's been mentioned already, was around public perception was one. The regulatory field getting harder as well, and another topic was the not the amateur use. So you touched on it, John, as well. That's not a problem, but maybe the disposable of amateur products, and then therefore more information that is needed at source when maybe purchasing it. One thing we sort of no one had the answer for, but wondered as well in that field, and take allotments as the example that you mentioned, John, is whether there's professional products now creeping into that field with the ease of access with internet purchasing in anything as well. So is that a problem that, I don't know, puts us in the limelight as an industry for the wrong reason as well? But a lot of the discussion was around public perception. Again, you mentioned the hiding away, maybe if you're an operator, and the as we mentioned as well, the spurious claims or accusations of what certain chemicals might do as well. And I think, from my point of view, public perception, I don't necessarily blame the public. It's what they hear, it's what they read, and in this world of different type of news, should we call it, going around, people do believe things, and that's it's the problem we've had probably on calls and meetings like this for the last 3 or 4 years. But the public perception was probably the biggest thing we spoke about as a group.
Yeah, I mean, a quick comment from me, I don't know whether Adrian has, but I mean, I think it's the lack of guidance on amateur products which concerns me. And you've heard me say before, because I've got allotment. It just happens to be at the back of my lawn, so it's great because it's an extension of my garden. But I know, I've had this discussion with one of the people there who said, I think glyphosate should be banned. And I said, I thought I saw you the other day spraying around the edge of your allotment. He said, no, I'm using Roundup. And everybody laughed at that. But this concept of the two was non-existent. And I think in Wales, they certainly have introduced, they trialled an amnesty scheme because it is this, I retired allotment holder on ours who retired after a long time. And again, I've told this story before, but it was a true story. He said, John, would you like to look in my shed if there's anything you want? And I looked at some of these and going, the labels were all off the things. And I said, I don't think you should have any of this stuff, really. But then you had the problem of how to dispose it. Now, I knew how to do that. But what I'm trying to get at is the average person wouldn't know, would they? They'd just dump it.
Because we don't, as amateurs, you don't read a label. You don't read the small print on a label. I mentioned in the group that there was a product that I purchased for the garden use, a glyphosate-based product from a garden centre. And when I actually looked at it, it had another active ingredient in it, which meant you couldn't put it on hard surfaces. But it certainly wasn't marketed as that. You know, it was marketed as a weed killer for your driveway and etc. So, maybe there's a responsibility on manufacturers when it comes to amateur use as well.
Adrian, I don't know whether you want a final comment before we draw this to a conclusion. Is there anything you want to say?
No, I mean, I think a lot of the points that you're raising are quite rightly picked up as questions in the National Action Plan. I mean, things around enforcement. And I mean, another aspect which I didn't touch on in my presentation was around the whole official controls regulation, which is being introduced and indeed is sort of increasing the sort of enforcement capacity of CRD. So there are things coming on stream. But I think a lot of these issues are raised as questions around the National Action Plan consultation, and even if folks haven't responded yet, it's an online consultation if they want to do, and you don't have to fill all the questions in. So I think there is scope to make some of these comments, and the more that people that make the comments, then the more likely action is to be taken, I think. So I'll just throw that bit in, John. Thanks.
No, I think I certainly amongst the members of the forum, I've urged them to do that. I mean, we've responded on behalf of the sector. That response is available. In fact, we sent out the draft to members, so you can, even if you agreed with some of the comments, cut and paste, dare I say, that there's a way of doing that. But I think, and I've also asked if people can share with me if they're prepared to. I think it's really important that we do respond, because we all know with any consultation, it's also about numbers, and it's also about getting those points being made more than once. So I would urge you to do that. Can I remind everybody who was a sort of a spokesperson or whatever, if they could email those points or key points they got out of the discussion to Kate, because it is helpful to me when I'm sort of responding to all sorts of things to hear your views, and particularly if some of those views aren't the same as what I thought they were. So it's good. Right. I think we're bang on time. So I'm now going to share my screen. Is that right, Kate? Or are you looking?
Yeah, just before you do, John, can I just say, anybody on the call today who wants to claim basis points, if you email me your name and your basis number, I'll upload confirmation onto the basis website that you've attended the meeting. But if you could email me those details, that would be great. Sorry, you can carry on.
No, that's fine. So with a bit of luck, Mark is on the line. So with a bit of luck.
Okay, can everyone hear me? You can, yeah. Good. Okay, and just a quick introduction. Sorry you can't see me. I live in a very rural location. Until fairly recently, the broadband connection was pretty good, but I think this is the consequence of a lorry actually going right through the telephone exchange and flattening it about a year ago. They rebuilt it, but it seems to be a lot worse since they rebuilt it. So apologies for that, but hopefully we can get through this. I'm going to talk about today why I think plant protection products are important in the amenity sector. Now, this could be a very wide-ranging discussion and presentation. And so I'm going to focus on one key area of this. I'm going to talk about herbicides, because maybe they're the hardest possibly in terms of an integrated program. And I'm going to pick on one particular sector, which is vegetation management and control, because I think, again, this is one of the hardest things with alternatives and integrated management. So where have we come from? Well, I'm old enough to remember pre-1986 amenity market. I was pretty wet behind the ear young guy, trials officer, who then went to start to do technical services and used to answer a lot of customers' questions in those days. And along came the control of pesticide regulations legislation in 1986, and that was the first time there was a legal requirement for sale, use and storage of plant protection products. And of course, we've got the Sustainable Use Directive since then. At the time, there was many options available, but I would say that most of that is now fallen by the wayside. And residual control, certainly on hard surfaces, was the norm then. There was a very wide range of products, and now nothing. There was little or no alternative technologies, although I do remember actually going a trip, was invited to give a talk probably in the probably early 90s to Alaska to talk about weed control on railways. And actually we were able to view a number of alternative technologies using steam, infrared, and even a section of rail that had been weeded by convicts from the Anchorage State Penitentiary. So, you know, there has been a look of alternatives, but they've obviously increased over a period of time. Next slide, please, John. So we're all aware, and we've discussed today quite a bit about the increased concern of use of PPPs in in the amenity sector, but it's nothing new. I mean, I can remember back to the mid-80s when local authorities had to defend their use. Primarily, it was at the time down to trade union concerns of their members, when probably a lot of the weed control in local authorities was done in-house. The use of social media, obviously it wasn't an issue back in the 80s at all, but the use of social media, I think, is very much accelerated this. Retweeting, being limited to 120 characters means it's easy to misunderstand really the message being put over. And I don't know about you, but I find this, the last bit, often both sides of the debate stay in their own echo chamber. And I think that that's a big problem, in that, you know, you're only really going to really agree with people who you follow, and perhaps often those people are the people who have exactly the same opinions as you. And that can be on lots of things. I'm sure if anyone's been on Twitter about and looked at how arguments start up on politics, can understand that. And of course, defending a negative is always much harder than trying to put over a so-called positive. And as we've probably touched on, I think Lewis said a little while ago, you know, people outside of the industry have little understanding of the complexities of this issue. And it's not, you know, I pose a question, are we in a non-science era? Because I get the impression that we are in a non-science era where science is not really viewed positively in many cases. One exception to that, I think that the recent vaccination has been very positive, and people do understand the science there and applaud the science. And I think we need to have a bit more of that. John talked about unintended consequences. We're not working together on this, so I'll go through this slide up about unintended consequences. And, you know, for me, I would say that the number one issue in the world probably is climate change. I probably see that, you know, like anyone see climate change, we see different weathering patterns to what we used to have. It's probably the number one thing. And certainly for this government it is, and probably globally it is as well. But it's amazing how many times you put in a policy, and sometimes with the best intentions it can backfire. And I put a few sort of examples here, and how that sort of almost relates to where we are at the moment, and what potentially could happen to us in terms of unintended consequences. So, you know, electric cars being powered by coal-fired power stations. You know, until we get to a situation where everything is solar or wind, you know, that is a bit weird, you know. Benign weather conditions cause lack of generator power. You know, that's an unintended consequences, and we may have seen some of that depending on whether how you use some of the reports recently. I'd read, although it's been denied, I've read that the German electricity sort of network was almost on its knees because of the very cold weather. Other people have said no, that wasn't the case. This issue in Texas recently had believed to have something to do with wind farms, and they're not able to generate sufficient power during a very extreme weather event in Texas. And in Germany, exiting nuclear energy before coal. So nuclear, we know, has issues, but one of the things is it's a clean technology, and coal, particularly the sort of coal that's burning in Germany, which is sort of a lignite coal, is extremely dirty, and you have unintended consequences in that. So my view is that an over-reliance of one technology can't be the way forward. This is an interesting one. I understand that the German government has voted in the last few days to effectively phase out the use of glyphosate by 2024. One of the main things that I saw in this report was glyphosate kills everything that is green and takes away insect spaces for life. Now that might come back to what Neil Huck was saying about this issue about does glyphosate kill insects. But I think in this particular circumstance, what they're saying is that if you spray weeds, that is a home for an insect, which is very true. But my argument is that if you need to control that weed, whether it is in a local authority situation or an agricultural field, whether you use chemical, hand pulling, thermal, hoeing, whatever, you're going to do exactly the same thing. You're going to get rid of that insect's home because you have to get rid of that weed because it's important to do so. And banning achieves nothing, I think, believe in agriculture and in our market. All it does is make it much more difficult to control weeds realistic. And I mean, that is a big cop-out as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to get into politics, but that is just, you know, a way of appeasing people by using an example. But actually, go back to unintended consequences, if you like, the same thing will happen whatever you use. Next slide, please, John. So if we want to increase wildlife and insects, and we need to increase biodiversity. Now, this is close to my heart. So on the left-hand side, you see, this is my front garden. Now, I maintain this in a fairly wild way, and I must say that I'm very happy with the result. I've developed this over a number of years. What you can't see at the bottom of that picture is that the edge of my gravel drive up to the house. And I will spray a couple of times a year for weeds on there, but I leave everything else entirely natural, apart from a small amount of non-native planting. And, you know, this is a haven for all sorts of insect life, for birds and everything. And so we need, if we want to increase biodiversity, we need to do more of this. The view on the right-hand side, the picture on the right-hand side, is over my hedge because I live next to a farmer's field. And my farmer neighbour does a lot in terms of field margins of headlands and things like that. And this is what he has. You know, he has to control weeds in his crop of cereals, or at the moment it's fallow at the moment. Probably going to be put a spring crop in. But it's a real haven for wildlife there. And this is what we need to do. We don't need to ban things. We need to manage the landscape better. So that's two examples that I can point to right on literally on my doorstep. Next slide, please, John. But of course, we still need to do this where needed. You know, we do need to control weeds appropriately in these areas. And it may be those embankments can become the wildlife havens. They are the wildlife havens for a lot of things. They have limited access by the public. They can thrive. We need to do more of that. But let's not get away from the fact, you know, and this is an important thing that the public have to realize, that we have to do this. Going back to climate change, we will mean a situation where perhaps we have to rely on much more public transport in the future. And those networks have to be maintained. There's no getting away from it. And anyone who just dismisses that really does not understand the issues here. Next slide, please, John. So do we have an adequate evaluation of the environmental impact of alternatives? We talk about the environmental impact of chemicals very much, but do thermal methods, electrical methods, do they have an impact on the soil, flora and fauna? I can't really find information out about that. There may be some, it's not readily available by Googling or anything. Do some of the chemicals used in thermal methods have an impact? They're meant to be green, if that's the phrase you want to use, in inverted commas. Are the CO2 emissions and water usage acceptable, these alternatives? I'm not trying to be anti this. I just think there needs to be a balance. If we're going to be going forward with this, these products and usage in society, both chemical and non-chemical methods, we need to understand what this really means. And I think there needs to be a lot more research in this. Next slide, please, John. I'll put some figures up, just talking to people in the industry and just looking at stuff on the internet. So, you know, for example, 2.4 linear kilometers per day per machine, let's say using a thermal weed control, versus 40 linear kilometers using a mini tractor and a sprayer. There's a big difference, a big difference there. 10,000 litres of water per hectare versus 100 litres of water per hectare on some of the thermal scheme. You know, I can remember many years ago seeing a system, and I asked the guy how much he was putting down. It looked like he'd emptied a washing machine out in mid-cycle, and he said 1 to 2 litres per square metre. Well, that's 10 to 20,000 litres of water. Is that a good use of precious resources? 100 hectares per season using 5 machines, 20 hectares per season on 1 machine. And that's what that I found out just by going on people's websites. I've calculated, and okay, this may be rough and ready, and I think again we need to look at these, but I've calculated that to run 1 machine, you're going to use you're going to produce 5 times much per day CO2 emissions compared to standard treatments. And of course, those treatments are going to go on a lot longer, because you can only do about a 20th of the area. So you're going to be, these emissions will go on a lot further. We need to understand these things. We need a proper assessment. Are non-chemical methods realistically only for small areas? Let's look at an integrated approach using non-chemical and herbicides. So for example, in this particular case, maybe for perennial weed control, we need to use herbicides. Maybe for annuals, we could look at non-chemical alternatives. We need some integration. Just getting rid of, you know, a method and relying on just 1 or 2 other methods is not the way forward, as far as I'm concerned. Next slide, John. I just pose this question, really. Alternatives, are they really for large-scale infrastructure vegetation management? I'm not aware of many large-scale, okay, 100 or 1,000 miles of vegetation management carried out with non-chemical methods. I really don't know about that. I'll be interested to know if anyone is doing that in a very large scale. And I say this is because there's a real threat that things will disappear completely and we'll be left with that, you know. And there's a big safety issue here. You know, go back to the previous slides John showed regarding the railways. You know, how do you do 26,000, I think it's 26,000 route miles of railway in the UK without using chemicals? Can you do it? I'm not sure you can. But the danger is that we could be heading for this. And it's not based on science, because at the end of the day, we know that most regulatory authorities around the world deem most of the chemicals that we're using as safe as use directed. But we're heading into, I think, a non-science argument again. And all the alternatives, are they any better for the environment? They may impact the environment in a different way, but, you know, as John has mentioned, and I've mentioned, the carbon footprint of these things can be massive. So I think there has to be much more research to develop new methods. And I think that that's something that we need to get on with now. Otherwise, we will have unintended consequences. Next slide, John. So this is my little way forward. I mean, you could add loads and loads of things here, but I think that, you know, it's important that perhaps we should do much more product stewardship programs with products, with an emphasis on safety in the environment, just rather than just saying, well, here's the product label, here's the literature. I think, you know, I've done some of these with groups of customers, and whilst they actually do take a long time, you get a lot more out of that. I think the customers get the users get a lot more out of it. They understand the product better. They will be better spray operators because of that. I certainly think that we should be looking at mandatory retesting of spray operators. You know, I took my test in 1986. I very rarely spray now, but I wonder whether I could actually redo it. But, you know, if I wanted just suddenly to set up a weed control company, I'd have my certification. I won't worry about that. I think we've got to look at further development of integrated pest management and IVM programs. You know, because one system isn't always the answer, but an integration system can make a lot of difference. And we need to look at further development. That's both in industry and maybe government. We had one piece of work done a while back on the FANET project, which would produce some interesting and good results, but I think there's a lot more that can be done in that area. And we need to continue to evaluate alternative technologies, either as a sole use or as an integrated program. And I thought, on a lighter note, I saw this the other day on Twitter, and it's just something that, you know, anyone who's worked in the UK climate, we all do. I thought this was good. You know, we start with winter, we have the fall, spring, you know, this nice warm weather we're having at the moment. This is where we are. Then we'll have the third winter. No doubt the winds, if you live on the East Coast like I do, the winds will swing around and it'll be snowing again soon. Then we have the mud season. I thought that was good. We have actual spring, we have summer, we have a pretend autumn, and then we have a second summer, a nice week of weather, and then we actually get our actual autumn, and then back to winter again. So I thought that was good, just to end on a lighter note at any rate. Thanks very much for your time. I'm sorry I couldn't be online. Maybe it's good that you don't see me, but at any rate, thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark. I think it was really good, Mark. I think you brought out some really good points. I think it was Adrian, the last one, who said about the operator. You know, we've all passed our driving tests, but we haven't had a test since, basically. So, and with modern cars and everything else, it's a bit like tractors, isn't it? Now we've got close farming friend. In fact, my wife spends quite a lot of time down there. And the other day he asked me to jump on the tractor and move it. And I said, oh, no problem. Got on there. I'd absolutely not got a clue. I just had not got a clue. And I think that's interesting because it's part of what you said, Mark. And I think that there's always a danger when you're discussing alternatives. I hate that word, but looking at other ways compared to of thinking you're knocking either side. And I think it's about time we stop doing that. I think we as long as we're looking at things in a realistic way and evaluating, which is what you were actually saying. And I think this carbon thing is a classic example. You know, I don't think I'm out of order to say where the Mayor of London pronounced that he was basically wanting to see all chemicals not used on London streets, and then somebody pointed out to him that some of the alternatives would affect all sorts of other things, and so he modified it. But you know, it's all part of this tapestry, which I think, interesting enough, with the review of the National Action Plan, it gives us an opportunity to do that, which we need to make sure we do and use that opportunity well. We're about at the end of where we are. I am actually, in a moment to finish, going to attempt to do something which might or might not work. About 9 months ago, I put a short video clip together, which some of you may have seen, some of you may not, on assurance, and I think it probably was it's probably worth playing it. And then we will conclude. Just to remind people, there are 2 more events to come. There's one on Thursday, which has got a Northern Ireland focus. So Adrian and I will say the same things, but probably have to adapt them slightly in line with where we are. And then we've got the one in Scotland. In Scotland, not in Scotland, but in Scotland in terms of virtually in Scotland. And don't forget, October the 21st, I hope you've got that in your diary, is the annual conference and exhibition. And I've already got all the speakers lined up, haven't I, Adrian? So all the speakers are there and the draft program's put together. So I am now going to try something and we shall see if it works. I am continuing my series on the ongoing review of the National Action Plan being undertaken by national governments. The topic this time is assurance. Some of the key policy drivers influencing the National Action Plan review are illustrated here. And in this series, based on these, I've identified some key areas for our consideration. And these are shown on the following slide. It is important that as a sector we discuss matters arising from these issues as a means of both inputting into and/or influencing the review process. This time my focus is on assurance. The pandemic has changed all our lives and created many personal tragedies. As we emerge from it, we have a really challenging time. What is clear is that we have a public now with a heightened awareness of health and safety. More than ever, they will seek assurances that practices meet legal and best practice requirements. This is certainly true in terms of amenity management. We need, as a sector, more than ever, to demonstrate our professionalism and full commitment to best practice at every level. Following its introduction at our 2019 conference, the amenity standard was formally launched earlier this year. It is similar to the Red Tractor standard in food and agriculture. Those operating to the standard and displaying its logo will demonstrate their adherence to recognised assured standards in all tasks undertaken. Those making use of organisations and bodies holding the standard will be assured of professional levels of operation. The introduction of the standard has had enthusiastic support and backing from DEFRA and all UK national governments. This slide sets out the key purpose of the standard. It is a standard designed to cover all our important and diverse sector. It will be managed, certainly initially, by the Amenity Forum, who will audit assurance schemes brought forward to be part of the standard, to ensure that they meet requirements and provide assurance of professional levels of operations and adherence to best practice. Organisations who wish to hold the standard will need to be a member of an approved assurance scheme and fully support the objectives of the Amenity Forum. The Forum will cover its costs of audits from fees paid by the assurance scheme bodies. Currently, 3 assurance schemes have initially met the audit and are recognised: Amenity Assured, Lawn Assured and the PCA Invasive Weeds Management Scheme. However, more are currently being developed and considered to ensure full coverage of the sector and all its bodies. In summary, the Amenity Standard is a bespoke quality management standard developed in partnership by all sides of the sector and managed and audited by the Amenity Forum. We believe that the Amenity Standard can provide appropriate assurance of the sector's commitment to best practice and give the public and key stakeholders a clear way of ensuring operations meet legal requirements and provide the appropriate assurance to the public on health and safety standards. It is vital that all operating in the sector fully support this and get involved. If you are an organisation wishing to operate at the standard and want more information on how, or would like to put forward or develop an appropriate assurance scheme to meet the requirements of the standard, please contact Steve as shown, and for all other inquiries contact Kate at the Amenity Forum office. Going forward, we know how tough it will be as we seek to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. What happens in Amenity impacts upon every UK citizen every day, and we need to ensure that all who operate in amenity management do so at the highest standards and can demonstrate it. The public and policymakers need assurance. Members of the Forum committed to best practice can deliver this, and widespread adoption and acceptance of the standard can ensure not only further increases in standards, but overall public confidence in our sector. Thank you. Well, I know that was a bit old, and can I just update you? There are 2 new schemes that are now part of the standard. One is for golf and greenkeeping in golf, which has now gone through audit, and one is for all other sports services. The last one backed by the, both of them backed by the relevant organisations and will be launched later this year. They were going to be launched pretty soon, but obviously with the pandemic and everything that's happening, we're delaying it slightly, but they will soon be there. So I think that basically concludes today. Thank you for your attendance. I hope you've got something out of it. Don't forget to get your points if you need them, whether what you've been told how to do that. And any feedback to us, particularly to the speakers, about whether you found it useful or not will be beneficial. So thank you very much indeed. Tell your colleagues and we'll see you at the next event. Goodbye. Thank you.